The Chicago White Sox have internal options for second base, but will the Sox finally make a move this offseason that will be considered a serious upgrade? There have been rumors circulating recently that the White Sox are interested in Milwaukee Brewers second baseman Kolten Wong. Locked On Brewers host Brandon Sneide will join me as we take a look at what a trade could look like.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Sox fans, welcome to Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all platforms. Follow us on Twitter at Locked On Sox. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just search Locked On White Sox. Hey, I'm your host, Nick Morawski, a lifelong diehard Chicago White Sox fan, recording this podcast just blocks from the ballpark in beautiful Bridgeport. You can find me on Twitter at Nick_GGTB. Really appreciate you letting me steal some of your time to talk off-season White Sox. Locked On White Sox is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The White Sox have lacked consistency at second base for what has felt like an eternity. It's a position that the Sox could address internally, but there are rumors floating around that Kolten Wong from the Brewers is of interest to the Sox. To help me make sense of what a potential trade could look like, I'm being joined by the host of Locked On Brewers, Brandon Sneide. Brandon, welcome to Locked On White Sox.
Nick, thank you for having me. You know, with so much football and basketball going on, it is a joy and a pleasure to talk some baseball because it is getting cold here by you and I. You're down in Chicago. I'm, of course, up here in Milwaukee. So it's good to talk about some baseball here in these cold winter months we're about to experience.
Yeah, we've got the winter meetings coming up next week, and the Chicago White Sox, their general manager has said, Rick Hahn, look, we're not going to spend a lot of money, but we could be improving via the trade market. And the Sox have a lot of areas to address. And recently, the name Kolten Wong started to get tossed around as, the Sox might be kicking the tires on that. Brewers picked up Kolten Wong's option, and he is being rumored not only with the White Sox, but there are other teams interested. Were you surprised to hear that Kolten Wong's name was being mentioned in terms of a trade?
Initially, I was, to be quite honest with you, but then after we got the breaking news, which it felt like it was at like midnight, which the Brewers probably did that on purpose here in Milwaukee, that Hunter Renfroe was on his way to Los Angeles. Things kind of started clicking in the mind of Brewers fans and mine as well. Is this team, Nick, is on the brink, in my opinion, of what is about to become a sort of a rebuild. Because look, you had your run in 2018. If you're a Milwaukee Brewers fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're one game away, a couple innings away, really, from going to the World Series. You were there in 2019 again in the playoffs. Josh Hader melts. In 2020 was kind of a weird year, and then you don't make the playoffs in this past year. So I was not surprised to see Kolten Wong. I was almost surprised, Nick, to be quite honest with you, that they picked up his option. To be quite honest with you, the problem is, if you're in the Milwaukee Brewers fandom, there is not a soul on that roster that is ready to play second base. The Brewers in their farm system, they're pretty loaded right now, especially in the outfield. They're lacking at second base as far as prospect wise. There's not one in the top 25 right now in their top 25 prospects. Not one second baseman. So that's the issue, I think, for the Brewers. And if you're looking at a trade, you would assume that that's going to be something that they're going to explore. A corner infielder maybe. But no, I'm not surprised. I think we're seeing a younger version of the Brewers upcoming in 2023.
Yeah, after what happened with the Brewers at the trade deadline this past season, I think a lot of baseball fans were just kind of looking at Milwaukee like, what's going on over there?
Well,
And
baseball fans, Brewer fans, we were we were looking
yeah.
at ourselves asking.
Yeah. So it's something that, I could see why the Sox are, of course, this fits the Sox, and in so many different ways. Lefty bat, has some power, reliable second baseman. It has been a revolving door for the White Sox for a long, long time. And we're saying goodbye to Josh Harrison. We have internal options. We've got some young guys, some young prospects. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Sox at the end of the day say, we're just going to fill this internally. But I think the fan base is begging for a serious option. Like, go out and get a real second baseman, a veteran second baseman, and we need that lefty bat. Would the Brewers, you think, be looking for big league talent, or do you think they're really just looking for just to stockpile the prospects at this
I think
point?
it's stockpile, Nick. I really do. And you saw it with the Hunter Renfroe, what they got with Jason Funk. He was one of the three in the Hunter Renfroe trade. He's the only prospect that was rated not only in the Angels top 30, but also in Milwaukee. He was in the number 16 prospect for the Angels organization. He comes into Milwaukee at number 14, and that was Hunter Renfroe. That was the Brewers' best hitter last year. Keep that in mind. I mean, a rocket arm in the outfield too. If you know Hunter Renfroe, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When you comes to Kolten Wong, though, I call it the year of the three for him last year, and it sounds weird. Third most games he's played in his career, 134. That's pretty respectable. Third highest WAR last year, 3.1, and the third highest percentage of hard hit balls in his career. It was like the year of the three. It was just a weird year. He was the Brewers' second best hitter overall. I mean, he was the second most qualified hitter in terms of OPS plus for the Brewers in 2022. I do not think the price tag is going to be very high for him. Again, it's a 1 year. I believe it's $8.5 million. I should probably know that answer. I'm going off the top of my head. But I believe the package for Kolten Wong could be light. And you're talking maybe, now I'll tell you I want Brian Ramos, but you guys will tell me no. But and maybe you'll tell Matt Arnold, the Brewers GM, that as well. But I don't think it's going to require a big package. I mean, maybe even a couple middle relievers, because that's really right now where the Brewers are lacking. They lose a couple in the offseason this year. Obviously, winter meetings might change some of that. It always seems to get the stove reheated in the winter months for baseball offseason. So to answer your question, I think the package could be extremely light.
There's a gentleman on the White Sox. His name's Gavin Sheets, and I would love to try to offload him onto the Milwaukee Brewers. Lefty bat, power lefty bat, natural first baseman, but for some reason has been out in the outfield. He could be a DH. I'm trying to get rid of this guy in the worst way. So think about him as well. Sox have got some untouchables, or at least they say that there are some untouchables from the big league roster. And really, a guy like Colson Montgomery, one of our top prospects, I don't know if he would even be somebody that would be, involved in something like this, or even should be. But I feel like a few seasons ago, whether it was Woodruff or Corbin Burns, there was some discussion between Sox and Milwaukee, I believe. And I feel like Andrew Vaughn might have been the want by Milwaukee. And one of the reasons it just didn't get done. So, depending on what you want, if you want arms, there are some arms, but we also have a ton of infielders in our farm system.
And that's where the Milwaukee Brewers, if you look at their farm system, their top 6 prospects, Nick, are outfielders. Now, Bryce Terrain comes in as he's more of a utility. He plays shortstop. He can also play outfield. They're loaded. And Garrett Mitchell made his debut last year out in the outfield. They're loaded. The Milwaukee Brewers are in the outfield position. They corner infield, like I said, not one in the top 25. I'm sorry, one is at second base in the top 25. They only have one prospect in the top 20 for the corner infield. So that's where the Brewers are lacking. It's felt like they've been lacking really since Prince Fielder left first base back in, 2010. They haven't been able to find a replacement. It's been like a committee over there. You had Jace Peterson over there at third base. You have Keston Hiura, who they, again, high draft pick, first round pick, just hasn't panned out in the major leagues defensively and somewhat offensively outside of his rookie year. So when it comes to corner infield, if that was the position that they would go target after for Kolten Wong, like I said, I'll take Brian Ramos off your guys' hands. It's completely fine. Also catcher, even I believe Adam Hackenberg. I think he's in your guys' top 20 prospect down in your farm system. A guy like Wilfred Veras, who I think plays both first and third, would be somebody that the Brewers might. I have no idea what they're looking at. But there's a revolving door here in Milwaukee, and really, we don't know what to expect this offseason. Okay. And a lot of us didn't think Hunter Renfroe at 11, he was going to get $11 million in arbitration this year. We have Corbin Burns, who's going to be due a lot of money. Brandon Woodruff going to be due a lot of money. Josh Hader obviously goes off to San Diego. What's the direction of this team? That's the question that as Brewer fans, people that cover this team, people that watch this team, people that root for this team, we're trying to figure that out, because if you're not going to extend Corbin Burns, well, then Kolten Wong means nothing. No offense to Kolten Wong. I love him. Gold Glove guy, hit the most home runs in his career last year in 2022 at 15. He's been outstanding. He's been a rock at second base, but he means nothing to Brewers fans at what, 30, 31, 32 years old if he's not part of the future.
Yeah, that's well said. If you're gonna tear things down, might as well go ahead and tear things down. And I'm getting the sense now that this could be a possibility. We could maybe make something work for Kolten Wong. He's been a reliable second baseman for almost a decade. Has shown some power. Did take a step back in 2022. In a moment, I'm going to pick your brain on what the Sox could potentially expect from Wong in 2023 if something were to work out. More on that in a moment. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. We've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, which I'm sure you do, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Okay, looking at Kolten Wong's numbers, Brandon, they dropped off, in 2022. He had some moments that I feel like he was making a comeback. He was making a surge. But should that drop off at all be a real concern moving forward in 2023?
I don't think it's going to be. I think when you look at a guy like Kolten Wong, he's about as efficient as it gets when you look at a major league player. I mean, outside of 2022, look, when the Brewers signed him, it was kind of a shock, to be quite honest with you. No, I don't think any of us really expected it, especially out of St. Louis at the time. But I think that, his OPS plus was a little bit below his career average. Again, like I said, he did hit for power last year for Kolten Wong. He had 15 home runs last year. Was that the beneficial part of playing at American Family Field, where that right field wall is brought in a little bit? Maybe. But I think what you can expect out of Kolten Wong is consistency. A guy that's going to hit around 300. He's a guy that hits for contact. Not many times does he strike out. His strikeout numbers were a little bit up last year, but he also dealt with a little bit more injuries. He had an oblique injury that he battled through in the middle part of the year. And I did mention earlier, it was the third most games he played. He played 134 games. Out of that, where he's at in his career, I think that's pretty darn good.
Yeah, I was impressed by that. Yeah,
I was impressed by it too. Even with battling that oblique injury, which, as you know, anybody that's a fan of baseball, an oblique injury is just kind of one of those things that lingers almost all year long. But no, I think what you're going to get is consistency. He's a contact hitter, doesn't strike out much. And look, can you name 5 better defenders at the position? It'd be hard.
Yeah, I was going to ask you defensively. The offense stuff, music to White Sox fans' ears. And Sox Park can be homer friendly. Didn't see it this past season as no player hit 20 home runs. But
that's shocking.
It really is. And that's a whole nother podcast. Trust me, it has been here on Locked On White Sox. We've got, a new coaching staff. We've got, I think a new philosophy. And might as well bring in, like you're saying, a consistent, serious, actual second baseman. And those offensive numbers, those sound great. Defensively, though, he would be matched up with Tim Anderson, who's our shortstop as of right now. You're saying he's a plus defender. Did you guys feel like you got what you thought you were going to get out of Kolten Wong defensively?
Well, and keep in mind, last year the bar was set probably a little bit high. He's coming off of, prior to that, 2 years ago, back-to-back Gold Gloves, 2019, 2020. Yes, I think what we expected out of Kolten Wong was exactly what we got out of Kolten Wong. Again, outside of the injury, marvelous defender. I mean, if a ball's hit the second base, if it's hit the shortstop, the Brewers had Willie Adames at shortstop, obviously Kolten Wong at second. Nobody was really concerned with it. Outside of him not being in the lineup when he was battling the injury, the Brewers defense was actually an improvement from where it was a year prior. So the concern was really, non-existent for him. And I, as a fan, as somebody that watches this team religiously, it was exactly what we expected. And look, if you pair him with Tim Anderson, do you have a better middle of the infield in the American League? Maybe, again, but it's one of those things where like you got to go in and look at it, because off the top of your head, that's pretty darn good.
Yeah.
Offensively and defensively. And I know the White Sox didn't do what they wanted to do last year in terms of wins, but that's talented roster, man. That's talented roster. That up and down is a team that's ready to win now. And if you're ready to win now, Kolten Wong's a great guy to grab.
Yeah, I was not terribly excited about Mike Clevenger, the move they made recently. It doesn't really move the needle too much for me. But if they seriously, and the Sox, if they seriously address the second base position and they, target Kolten Wong, this is the guy we want, and they can go after him. Everything I know and now hearing from you, that would really be, just an early Christmas gift if something could get done during these winter meetings that are coming up. And if we're to believe that the Sox will try to get stronger through the trade market. Sox horribly defensively last year. I mean, they just, they could not figure it out defensively. I think there's going to be a change in culture, a change in philosophy, I hope, with the Pedro Grifol era. And why not make that a point of focus defensively at second base? Negatives for Kolten Wong. Obviously there's a lot of positives. What did you find that maybe you weren't terribly thrilled about with his game?
I think the only thing was just, and I keep going back on it, was the third most games played, but he was just injured. It felt like more often than he ever has been as far as being a Brewer. Now, again, 134 games is still pretty darn good, if you ask me, especially at this point in his career and where he is age-wise. But it felt like it was a lot of ground balls and injuries were the two biggest things for Brewer fans that I think we were disappointed in. I use disappointed. I want to be easy with that because we weren't necessarily disappointed, but if you're looking at where he was coming from in the years prior, that was probably it. His arm is still lethal. I mean, his range is still incredible. He's a darn good leader in the clubhouse, in that locker room. But if I had to tell you where we were disappointed, it was just the health. And again, that could be just sheer luck, bad luck, really, at that. But he hit a lot of ground balls and he was injured, on and off the IL more than we were used to as Brewers fans.
Yeah. Injuries seem to be rampant in a lot of different teams. We suffered through ours, and I think that needs to be reanalyzed, just the strength and conditioning program. And you hear a lot of talk about, the lockout last year and the weird spring training, and hopefully this is going to be a more traditional off season, because boy, I can't handle any more of these types of injuries. We've had it for too many seasons.
Bad luck.
We've had some serious bad luck. So if the Sox can't get a deal done for Kolten Wong, could the White Sox and Brewers still be trade partners? Going to talk about that in a moment. Okay, Brandon, Sox are looking to improve and address needs via the trade market. Maybe it happens with the Brewers, but I guess the big question is, do you see Kolten Wong realistically coming to the White Sox? Do you think, the White Sox have enough to get this deal done?
I'll tell you this, Nick, and you and your listeners can take this for what it's worth. I will be shocked come April, come February, when pitchers and catchers report, if Kolten Wong is on this roster, period. I'd be shocked. I was shocked, quite frankly, and so was Brewer Nation, that they picked up his option. And the first thing you think of as a Brewers fan, they picked up his option, and we're just so used to disappointment. Yeah, he's getting traded. That's what we thought. And then Hunter Renfroe, your best hitter, your only, consistent bat last year, was traded for, again, mid prospects, number 16 in the Angels farm. And that was it. And again, a guy that's getting $11 million, Kolten Wong's right there with $8.5 million. So I'd be shocked if he is on the Brewers roster. And look, if you're the Milwaukee Brewers, if you're Matt Arnold, right? This is Matt Arnold's first year. Of course, he's been in the Brewers organization for a number of years. David Stearns is, quote unquote, taking a advisor role, whatever we want to call it. He's got big shoes to fill. Like, this is the golden age. I call it the golden age of Brewers baseball. 4 out of 5 seasons in the playoffs was unheard of for the Milwaukee Brewers outside of the 1980s. So Matt Arnold has big decisions to make. Is Kolten Wong part of your future? You have Jackson Chourio coming up, Sal Frelick, Joey Weimer, Garrett Mitchell, and I'm rallying off names that you guys might not even know. These are our young prospects coming up. If you remember Brewers with Ryan Braun, Prince Fielder, J.J. Hardy, they all kind of came up together. That's where this class is for the Milwaukee Brewers. Is Kolten Wong part of that? Is a 30-plus-year-old middle infielder, a guy that's battled injuries, going to be part of that? Probably not. So again, if you're going to trade him, let's just say hypotheticals. I don't know all the rumors where he's going. Why would you trade him to, let's say, Philly? Why would you trade him to, let's say, Atlanta? Why would you trade him to, let's say, New York, the New York Mets? Get him to the American League, baby. Get him out. We don't want to. Yes. We don't want to see him in the 9th inning with 2 outs and a guy on second. I don't want to see that out of Kolten Wong, because I know what he can do. He's darn good at what he does, and there's a reason he's been in where he's been for the last 10 plus years. So yes, I do think it's very possible. If I'm the GM, again, you can look around me for those on YouTube. I'm not the GM. I'm in my basement. But that's what I would do, because look, he's a guy that you can kind of just thank you, shake his hand. We went to the playoffs every year that he was there, minus the last year. Go to the American League. Here's a team right now. And again, looking from the outside, and you would know more than I would, so would your listeners. That's a team that's ready to win. They're ready to compete in the American League, especially in the American League Central. Yeah. So here you go, Kolten Wong. It's a win-win for Milwaukee. Give us whoever, it takes off the money off the books. The Brewers are a little cheap here and there, so I'm sure they're going to be looking forward to dumping some money. But I think it's a high possibility that you see him in the South Side pinstripes.
That would be a magical moment. The more you've talked about him, and the more I read, it feels like this would be such a great guy to kind of build around a little bit with the new philosophy that Pedro Grifol and the coaching staff might want to put in place. And I think you're right. With the way that the Milwaukee Brewers are going, I don't see Wong in a Brewers uniform in 2023. I sure hope it's in a Sox jersey, but I feel like there are going to be some other suitors, perhaps. And if you're looking to get young and you want to get the most you possibly can, we don't have a terribly deep farm system. That's the worry. I guess it's just, what are you really looking for position wise?
Yeah, and if you're looking at position-wise, I know we talked about it before, but the corner infields for the Milwaukee Brewers, and I want to go back and correct myself. We do have a second baseman in the farm system in the top 10. He's just he's at high A right now, so that can always change. But that's also, again, years, a couple of years away. You're not going to have that overnight. But it's corner infield for the Milwaukee Brewers starting. But that's the thing, though, Nick, is that we don't really know. Are you going to extend Corbin Burns? Like, are you going to pay? If you're not going to pay him, okay, that's a whole nother position that needs to be addressed, going forward. If you're not going to sign Brandon Woodruff, if you're the Milwaukee Brewers, okay, that's another position, another big, size shoes to fill, starting pitch, your number 2 starting pitching. Is Devin Williams going to get back on track? He struggled last year in the second half of the season after Josh Hader was traded. You need a closer. Like, they have so many holes right now in the Milwaukee Brewers organization, in their major league roster right now. They're not even at 40 yet. I mean, I believe the last I looked at it was 36. Yeah. I could be wrong if they grab somebody, but so many holes to fill, so many spots to fill. If you're the Milwaukee Brewers, you really don't care, I guess. outside of outfield. I'll tell you that right now. We're good on outfield. Our top, let me see here. Our top 5 prospects are outfielders. And one of them, Garrett Mitchell, was in the major leagues last year. So I think we're good on the outfield, but anywhere else, really, I mean, I would take anything for outside of outfield.
Yeah, it's Milwaukee and the White Sox. They have a ton of history. I was telling you before we started recording, I haven't really enjoyed my time up in Milwaukee watching Brewers White Sox games, and it looks like the Brewers will be coming to the South Side this coming season. I wish they would play each other home and home every single year. I root for the Brewers, and it's been kind of impressive to see what they've done as maybe a traditional small market team over the last few years. And what we saw as Sox fans in 2016 when we traded Chris Sale away, you kind of have to, the GM, Rick Hahn, was good about tearing it down and getting a bunch back in return, but we haven't really done much with it since. So hopefully there's some better directions ahead for this White Sox team. But hey, if this goes right and we can orchestrate something for Kolten Wong, you and I will definitely be talking again.
Well, I'll tell you right now, if there's, and I'm not just saying this because I'm on your podcast. I'll tell you right now, the number one team that I want him to go to is the Chicago White Sox.
Love it.
Because the other teams that he's linked to, I don't want to see him go to a competitor. Now, I don't think the Brewers are going to be, competitive in 2023, meaning playoff wise. They're going to be young and they're going to have question marks, and they're going to have guys that are playing roles that they may have never played before and filling shoes that maybe are too big at this moment. But if there's a team right now, again, I respect the White Sox. I told you before we started recording, I partied with them last year. We tailgated. They're way cooler, nicer, friendlier, better looking than the neighbors to the north of them. That's for sure.
Wonderful to hear. I knew that already, but it's great to hear you say that. I really appreciate you joining and just giving some insight. Brandon, where can we find, all your stuff that you're doing?
Sure. You can follow me on Twitter at Brandon_Sneide. That's spelled Sneide. And then you can follow my podcast, Locked On Brewers, at Locked On Brewers. You can also just go into the YouTube, search Locked On Brewers. Should be the first one that pops up. And we're going to get rolling here soon, Nick. I telling you before we started recording, we're going to Locked On Brewers. This is my first Locked On experience with you at the network. So we're going to get rolling here with Brewers. As you can tell, just from hearing me for the last 30 minutes, we have a lot to discuss as Brewers fans.
Yeah, and I think you're starting it at the right time. Winter meetings are fun. We've been kind of without the in-person winter meetings for the last several years, and
if we're to
believe what we've been hearing, it should be pretty exciting. And that's what I think baseball needs a little bit of that, like NFL, sometimes NBA, where everything just happens and it's crazy. It's this flurry of action. Baseball tends to drag, over several months. It'd be great if next week there was a lot of fun stuff to report on. But thank you so much for your time, Brandon. And, best of luck. And we'll definitely be talking down the road.
Absolutely, Nick. Thank you so much.
You got it. Folks, thank you so very much for making this podcast part of your daily routine. You can find the Locked On White Sox podcast absolutely everywhere you find your podcasts. We are on Twitter at Locked On Sox. You can find me on Twitter at Nick_GGTB. Thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up on the next episode, I'll continue to look at off-season scenarios for the Chicago White Sox as the Pedro Grifol era moves full steam ahead. Really appreciate you making time for the Locked On White Sox podcast. I'm Nick Morawski. Until next time, go Sox.